Okay, over to you. Thanks, Connie.
Right. Thank you very much, and welcome to another Monday morning. And here in Pretoria, it's looking a little cloudy. I'm not quite sure what to expect of the weather, but whatever it brings, let's hope it brings a bit of rain to all over the country. We all need it. Let's just do a quick recap on last week. I won't go over everything again, but I'd just like to refresh your memory as to what we touched on. We had a look at what is Excel, and there we had a look at a number of things in terms of Excel's background, and just to gain a bit of a perspective on things. We had a look at the workbook structure, and there specifically we had a look at the backstage and how to open and a new file, how to save and print. We had a look at the workspace and a workbook versus a worksheet. We had a look at how to zoom in and out. We touched on the menus and also the ribbon. And then towards the end, we went over to an exercise that we started with, and we have actually started doing the data entry exercise, but we stopped very shortly into the start of the whole exercise, which was here. And if I remember correctly, we were busy putting in the date, and then we stopped for the week. So I think at this point, Shane, if you are ready, if we could just hear from you, what did you find most beneficial over this last week that you were able to use specifically? It may have been a while when you learned about it, but were you able to use it? So, Shane, back to you.
Right, thanks, Connie. I've got that and I've actually just displayed it. Folks, let me just explain how this works. We've rigged this thing so that you can actually choose one or two or four options. You don't have to just choose one. Okay, so what we're looking for is during the past week, what have you guys used, what the explanation workbook and worksheet, and I mean, I think pretty much all of you should be able to select that one. I'm sure that you've used at least opened up a workbook and used a worksheet or two or three. Maybe you've inserted a worksheet, made an exact copy of one. But yeah, if you want to score that one, please do so. We'd be delighted, as I say, we'd be delighted if you scored all four. Ribbon and menus. Has anybody now that you know what a ribbon is in an Excel, from an Excel point of view, maybe you even explained it to somebody else who you've used the term, you can score that one. Okay. Remember that you can switch them on. You can switch the commands on and off just by double-clicking on the worksheet tab. And then the backstage view, has anybody gone into the backstage view? Remember, that's by clicking on File. And if you have done that, you can score that one. That's where you go for print preview, for example. And then last but not least, intro to data entry. Connie, I don't know if you want to explain a little bit more about what you're looking for on that point, just while the guys are voting, please.
Right, as I said, we really started with the basics and we put in today's date. I'll just recap on that also when we start after the poll. And we didn't do much, but there was a little bit of data entry which I'd done beforehand, and the only thing that we actually started with was putting in the date. But if there was anything that we did around that exercise of the data entry that you felt that you were able to do better this last week than what you were able to do it before you had the lesson, you can score that one as well.
Okay, folks, and this is anonymous. We at this point we can only see percentages coming in. We can't see, we only see in the report exactly who scored what, but for now we can just see percentages. And I must say, we'll just give you literally a couple of seconds to score this. So please cast your votes. You need to select and then hit submit. I think it's a submit button. Maybe somebody can just remind me what that little button looks like. Is it submit at the bottom? I don't actually do the polls too much. I normally flight them. I normally put them up. I don't normally do them myself. So all right. So it looks like we're getting, I think pretty much most people are using everything, which is great. Not everybody's voted yet, but I'm going to just give you a 5-second countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, so let me just close that poll. And there we go. I think Connie, yeah, just the results of that one. It looks like everybody's using everything. I'm not able to tell who scored what there, but I think that we've probably got, if you add them all up, everybody is using pretty much everything that they've been using, which is really positive. So Connie, I think on that note, well done, and back to you.
Right, that is very good news. Thank you very much. Okay, last week, just before we ended, we were looking at putting in a date. Now, we had a bit of a oops there, but I know why. I wasn't looking properly. And what I'm going to do is I will remove the date that we put in. Now, you'll see that the date is at C2. If you remember how to refer to a specific place on the worksheet, is you use a column with a row number. And in C2 is where we put in the date using a function called today. Now, what I'll be doing is I'll be removing that, and I'll specifically be narrowing the column again. And now we're going to insert the date. And there's a number of ways that you can do that. You can physically type in the date. For example, you could type in the 19th of June 2017 and press enter, and it could display in that way. You can also type in 19 /07 2017, and it could or not display in that way depending how the cell has been formatted. But you can also put in a function. The function being equals. In the formula bar, you type in equals, and then we saw that you can type in today being a function, and you'll see if it is a function immediately just under where we are typing. There is a symbol fx or f of x and also today, and Excel says this returns the current date formatted as a date. And you'll see that f of x also to the left of the formula bar. And all that we need to put in there is you open your brackets and you close your brackets and you enter. Now, immediately you will see we have the hashtag symbols which have been created. Last week we learned that in a normal sized cell, if there's not data to the right, the information or the data that you typed into it would flow over, because usually if there was data, it would only show 8 characters. Hopefully you remember that. However, when we type in a function like this, you are not typing in actual data. You may have noticed or remember seeing when I typed in the date, it actually displayed the date. It rolled over into column D. But now that I've typed in a function, Excel is not giving us what we want to see. And in order to see what is in that cell, we need to widen the column again. So between C and D, look at where my mouse is. You will see it has that double-headed arrow left and right. And you can just drag open the column, and it's not wide enough yet. And there we have it wide enough the way we wanted it. And now you can see what the information is that Excel displays. Something that I wanted to show you last week, and that is where we had a slight hiccup, but I can quickly show you again. Let me undo what I have just done by pressing, who can remember, Control and Z. That will undo the last action, and then also again. And remember, we broadened it twice, the column, and again, which will then remove whatever we typed in there. Now I will go and type into the formula bar or at least I won't type anything in, but I will just click my mouse into the formula bar. So you will see there to the right of the f of x is my mouse, which is showing that it is ready for data. And let's just quickly have a look here. Shane normally answers all the questions, but let's just see. Okay, there seems to be a bit of a problem there. Shane will handle that. Somebody's having a problem with their audio. The best is normally to log out and then to just log in again. That normally sorts it out. Right. To use that f of x, this is something that you can also learn to do because it really helps you when you're working with functions. What you could do is click on that f of x function, insert function, and you'll see the minute you click on it, it automatically puts in the equal sign into the formula bar. And now it also brings up a dialog box which says insert function. And it then allows you to search for whatever function it is that you are wanting to use. It will also by default give you a number of the most recent functions that you've been working with, which is what it's doing at the moment. You will see or select the category most recently used. Now, because the most recently used one was the today function, it is giving us that as the default. So I will click on it because we're going to use it. If it was not here, I would then just type a brief description of what I was wanting to do, and then I would click go. And Excel would have a look what it has available, and it will give me options. It also, right at the bottom, once I have selected today, sorry, it will also tell me at the bottom what the format should be. And you'll remember that I actually typed in after the equals today, open bracket, close bracket. But what I need to do now is to click on OK. And Excel, if you look in the formula bar, has now inserted the function that needs to happen. So it returns the current date formatted as a date. The function takes no arguments, and remember last week we spoke about arguments. Arguments are a lot like instructions that we give to Excel, and we might have as arguments that it starts with a certain point and ends at a certain point, or that it works within a range. And all that Excel says here is the function takes no arguments. The formula result is volatile, which means that it can change all the time. It's also got a help. So if you need more help on using the function, you could actually click on help and you would be able to get more help on using the function. What it means by volatile in this specific instance is that today means that whatever today is will be the date which Excel returns. I said last week, what was the date? It was the 12th. And I asked all of you to please take note of the day, which was the 12th, because if we open or use the function this week, it should be today's date, which is the 19th. So let's have a look, and we click on OK, and we get our hashtags. And if you look at the notes towards the bottom, seeing the hashtag symbols instead of the date, if a row of hashtag symbols appears in cell C2 instead of the date after adding the today function to that cell, it is because the cell is not wide enough to display the formatted data. The hashtag may appear in other cases for other reasons, but we deal with that with later courses. As mentioned previously, the unformatted numbers or text data will spill over to empty cells to the right if it is too wide for the cell. But data that has been specifically formatted as a specific type of number, such as currency or dates, which is like ours, or a time, do not spill over to the next cell if they are wider. They rather display the hashtag error. So if you were wondering why this does not roll over because there's no data in D, this is why. It's because it has been formatted as a specific type of number, and that is why the hashtag shows. So to correct the problem, widen column C using the method that we described earlier, and there are actually two ways of doing it, and each way has got its specific function and purpose. We taught you how to manually extend the width of column C, and that is by hovering the mouse between the header columns C and D, and you'll see there we have the left and right, or the double-headed arrows, and you can manually drag it open to the correct size. You can also, if you want Excel to automatically resize the column for all the numbers or all the data within the column, you could also double click. There where you are at the moment, where you see the double-headed arrows, you can double click. And watch what happens here. If I double click, there you can see I did not drag anything. Excel had a look at all the data that is in column C, and it expanded the width to accommodate the largest set of data in the column. So fortunately we don't have any wide data, otherwise it could have stretched the column width much wider than what you see at the moment. But for our purposes, this is working just fine. Good. Now, adding a named range is actually something that we teach at a later stage in more advanced courses. But I was thinking this might be a very cute thing to teach you right now, because I do believe that it is a good thing to learn to use named ranges, and I'm going to tell you why in a couple of minutes. It really assists you, especially when you are copying references or formulas and sometimes even functions. So if you can learn to use named ranges right in the beginning, you're going to be years ahead of many of the colleagues that you have who may even never have heard of a named range. So let's have a look at that. A named range is created when one or more cells is given a name to make the range easier to identify. Named ranges can be used as a substitute for cell references when used in functions, formulas, and also charts. Now, the easiest way to create named ranges is to use the name box located in the top left-hand corner. Remember, I told you where the name box is, and here you can see we have clicked in cell C2, and in the name box to the top left, you can see that C2 is what is in the name box. So at the moment, that specific cell that we are working with is called C2. But you can also give it a name. Now, in this specific tutorial, the name rate will be given to C6 to identify the deduction rate applied to the employee salaries. So what we're going to do is we're going to click in C6, or it will be used in C6. So we will now, I've actually typed in something wrong here. This should actually be C3 is the rate. But okay, what we will do then is not type into C6. I will fix this and I will send this out to you. And we will call this deduction rate. I've actually typed in 0.06, which is the same as 6%. And we will give it a name. And we will call it rate. How do I change the name? Is I click in the name box, and you will see that C3 has been highlighted, and I now just type in the word rate and I press enter. And now if you type in that cell again, I've clicked out and I click back in, you will see that the reference to that cell C3 is now rate and not C3. If we click anywhere else, you will see that the reference is always the C5 or the B whatever, or the reference of the column and the row, but in terms of C3, the reference is rate. Now maybe I should just quickly explain why we are doing this exercise. If when we work or refer to any cell in Excel, and especially this happens when you are doing calculations, which is what we will be doing, you refer to a specific cell to perform a specific arithmetic function. Now, let me click into C85. Well, no, let's make it easier. Let me say I will click into C6, which is where we were going to be working. And I will say C6 and type in the equals the data next to C6, which is B6. Notice what Excel is doing. It refers to B6. So C6 equals B6 times, and let us call it 10% so that it's easier to understand. And once I've typed in the formula, this is a formula, not a function, because it's not an inbuilt function into Excel. If I now press enter, you will see that the result is 10% of B6, and that's exactly what I wanted Excel to do. Now, if I wanted to repeat this in all the lines beneath that, or all the rows beneath that, I would copy and, that's right, paste that formula into the rows beneath. Now, there's a whole number of ways that you can do that. You can either use the shortcuts that we learned about last week. You can use the menus, and here you can see towards the top left is copy, and you could copy, and as you click the copy button you can see how it lets these little ants run around the box, and then we can click where we want to paste it, and we click in the box just below that, or the row just below, and then we can paste it. Here you can see the paste command at the top left, and if we paste it, then that formula is copied and pasted into the row below, and you can see it has perfectly calculated 10% of Mr. or Mrs. Wilson's gross salary. Now, the other way to copy it is also to use the shortcuts that you learned about last week, which is Control C to actually copy it. Let me undo this. And we will then use the, I now went and let me just repeat this. That equals B6 multiplied by 10% and enter. And now I want to copy that using shortcuts that I learned. So it is Control C. I move down into C7 and then I press Control V. And there we've also copied and pasted the formula. Notice that it copies everything when you use this method. At a later stage you will learn how to copy only parts of the item that you selected, either the formats or the actual value, but that's also something we teach you in a later lesson. So it has copied everything, which is the formats and the formula and everything. But there's something else that I want you to notice. Before we get there, however, another way of copying is you'll see here at the right bottom corner of C7 is a little square item or box. We call that a handle, and more specifically a fill handle. Why do we call it a fill handle? Is you can use your mouse to hover over that fill handle, and you'll see that the mouse turns into a narrow cross or a thin cross. And once it's turned into a thin cross, you can use your mouse, you can click and hold the button to actually drag it downwards. Now as you drag it downwards, it copies the formula all the way down to where you have dropped it. There's also a different way of doing it. Wow, you're learning a lot of ways now. And that is when you have data on your left, you can double click drop down. In other words, you don't have to drag it all the way down. You hover over that fill handle and you can double click in the same way as we double clicked on the column width just now. You can double click and Excel will copy all the way down as far as what your data goes, if there are no breaks in the data. So we'll do that as well. And there we can see Excel has filled in not values, but Excel has actually filled in the formula that we typed in right at the top. But now the thing that I want you to take note of is the following. Excel has not gone and copied just a value. The original formula was B6 times 10%, and the next one was B7 by 10%, B8 times 10%, and B9 by 10%. So Excel has automatically changed the cell reference. The reference is the original reference was B6, and Excel automatically adjusted that reference as we copied the formula down. And when Excel automatically adjusts the reference, we call that relative referencing. Excel will copy relative to where you started. So we started with B6 and we copied and we pasted relevant to what the original instruction was. So Excel has a look. What did you originally want to do? You wanted to take the data to the left and multiply it by 10%. So when you copied it into the next row, Excel automatically put in a relevant formula, a relative formula, sorry, and it looked at not the original cell, which was B6, but it went relatively and looked at the cell to the left of whatever the current cell is. So Excel is actually quite clued up, and Excel was able to adjust the original instruction to all the pastes that we did to the bottom. However, there may be times, and this is actually one of those times, that, let me just undo these, that you may not want to actually do a relative copy down. You may want to do what we call an absolute copy down, which is you want to refer, we do not want to deduct 10%. We have in fact a deduction rate, which is the 0.06. Now the deduction rate is, you'll notice we have actually removed the name here now because I undid a lot of things that I did. At the moment the reference here is still C7. 3. Now, in order to make this easier, let us just change this to 0.10, which is 10%. Would you agree? Good. Now, if we wanted to use this deduction rate in the formulas that we used here, how would we go and do that calculation? We would go and click into C6, which is the first bit of information that we want, and we would put in the equal signs, and you'll see in the formula bar your equal sign has come up, and we'll say that the data that we want here as to the actual deduction equals the data on the left, and all I have to do is to click on that data. You don't have to go and type in B6. You can if you want to, but that's not working efficiently. What you really want to do is you want to point. So how do we point? We go and click on the data block that we want Excel to work with, and that would be B6. So as I click there, you will see Excel automatically inserts B6. And I think, right, B6 times, and we use the times operand, and then we click on times what? Just now we typed in 10%, and then we copied the formula down, but now we want to refer to a specific cell, which we are calling the reduction rate, and we've made it a 10%. So I just go and click in C3. I don't have to type in C3 in the formula. I just go and click. And there you will see Excel has inserted C3. So the formula we're looking at is equals B6 times C3. If I enter, I will now get, as I did just now, the exact same answer, which is 10% of the gross salary. Good. We understand that. Now we say, okay, we've learned how to copy and paste. So whichever method we use, whether we use the Control-C, Control-V, or we use the menu to copy and to paste, or we double-click drop down, let's do that. We've learned a lot. So we double-click drop down and we are mortified. Just look at what a mess that is. Now, I'm sure that this has happened to you already, and I will now explain why. The reason why is that Excel by default will copy relatively. So here we had the correct formula, which was B6 by C3. However, the next block, what Excel would do by default is it would select B7, and we thought it will retain that value of 0.1, but what actually happened? Let's go and have a look. And let me just escape there. What Excel did is when it went and copied that formula, it copied to the left correctly because it's using the relative copy as a default. So Excel saw we're moving down one. Let me select not B6 but B7. Great. And Excel was feeling very chuffed with itself. But now it also moved the top reference down one relatively. So instead of referring back to the 0.1 and anchoring that, so to speak, Excel moved down one block. And what did it find there? A 0, no data at all, which is why we got the answer of a 0 instead of 10% of this value here. Now we got something else as well. We also received this hashtag value, and we look at the top and we see, but there's a formula. Why do I get this? Well, if we double click on that, we'll see why. Excel, as per its default, moved down one, but it also moved down one with the top reference. So It did not multiply by a 0.1. It did not multiply by a 0 or nothing at all. It now tried to multiply as with a data entry called deduction. And it was a mess. And of course, when we reached the last bit, we still have the formula up there, but now Excel used the correct cell to the left, but it also moved down again one cell with the last reference, which used that amount in C6, and that's why we got a calculated value as large as what we did. I've removed it there now. So how do we rectify this? Well, remember I said by default Excel will use a relative reference, and a relative reference will always look like this that you see here at the top. It will be a B6 or whatever the reference is multiplied by a second reference. But we want Excel to move down relatively as we copy the formula downwards, but we want to anchor the top cell. In other words, the B6 must copy down relatively, but the C3 must always remain C3. Excel must not copy that down. And how do we do that? Well, the way to anchor a reference, you use a $sign. Now, I'll just do this manually for now. Let me go and do that manually for you. Is you need to put the reference that you want anchored. You need to anchor by way of a $sign. So in front of the C, we want to input a $sign. And in front of the 3, we want to input a $sign as well. You can actually use different combinations to anchor certain parts of the reference. If you only wanted to anchor the column, you would only put the $sign in front of the column, or the C in this case. If you wanted to only anchor the row, then you would only put the $sign in front of the row number, which in this case is 3. But for all practical purposes and to understand this easier, we are going to anchor that whole reference as a total reference. So we put in a $sign before the C, a $sign before the 3, and now I would enter. So now I've got a perfect calculation, and I look at my formula at the top, and I see that the B6 is a relative reference because it's got no $signs, and then that gets multiplied by an absolute reference because it has the $signs. So the logic in this is that when I copy these cells downwards, the B6 part of the formula is going to be adjusted automatically by Excel using relative referencing. Excel will keep on adding on a row number, so the next one would be B7, B8, B9, and so on. But the C3 must remain C3. It must not be changed at all. So let's see if that actually works that way. And we can double-click drop-down. We need to learn to do these things efficiently. And we double-click drop-down and look what happens. We get perfect calculations in every cell because we can see you can click on any one of these data blocks and you can see that Excel has copied the B9 or that first reference. It has copied relatively, but it remains anchored an absolute reference to C3. I hope I haven't confused you now, but this is quite an important aspect to understand when working with Excel, because you could start setting up formulas and copying and pasting stuff, and it can really nauseate you if you don't understand the way that Excel works when you copy and paste formulas. By default, Excel will use a relative reference. but you can go and anchor any part of that formula by putting in dollar signs. And in a later course that we do, we actually teach you a lot more about that. And this is where this little exercise comes in that we are busy doing now. Let me undo all of that. And now we say that we are talking about named ranges. And there is a way of that we can bypass all of this without having to put in any dollar signs. And the way that you can make your life a lot easier is by learning to work with named ranges or giving a reference a name. Now, I understand that this is usually more advanced learning, so forgive me if I am confusing you, but I really think that you are going to find a lot of value understanding this. Okay, now the deduction rate, which we've made 0.1, I'm going to make a 0.06 again. We want it to be 6%. And we're going to give that a name instead of a reference. So at the moment the reference is C3. By clicking in the name box, I can give it a name, and we said that we will call it rate, R-A-T-E. I type in the name and I press enter. So this C3 has now become rate. It has received a name instead of a reference. Now let's just think about the logic behind this. If we had to copy and paste now, every time you refer to C3, it wouldn't really matter if it was relative or absolute if it had a name instead of a reference. Because a name is something which is allocated only to this specific cell. And if Excel had to go and look for a name every time, it would go back to the same piece of data. It wouldn't add on and call this rate 1 or rate 2 or rate 3 and then copy down accordingly. Rate remains rate. So let's see if this is going to work for us. If we try and do this deduction now, and we enter a formula, and we say equals, let's just come down to the deductions formula that I take you through this step by step. We always use the equal sign to actually determine a calculation. So we type in equals, and then we refer to whatever block it is or data, piece of data that we want to work with. In this case, it would be B6. And what we did previously is we said we multiply that, put in the multiplication operand, and we multiply that with what? Now, in the past, we referred to C3, and the tendency would be to go and click, or the right way to work is to go and click in the data cell that we are wanting to work with. And I did exactly that now as well. But what do you see in the formula bar? You will see that even though Excel indicates that we are still in C3, it has entered rate into the calculation. So if I press the enter now, let's go and look what happens. It went and did a calculation for us, and before you think it's wrong, remember we changed the 10% down to 6%, which is why the number has become smaller, but it has done the calculation for us using this formula. B6 which is what? It is Mr. Smith or Mrs. Smith's salary multiplied by what? And while it is actually C3, we've used the name rate, and we could use it because why? Because we went and allocated the name in the name box to C3 and we called it rate. Getting back to our logic, if I now had to copy this downwards, I don't have to worry about is it relative, is it absolute, because Excel will always go back and refer to the name of the cell that we are referring to. By default, Excel will change and do a relative reference for B6. So B6 will be changed to B7, B8, B9, but the C3 data will always be called rate. So I don't have to worry about putting in any dollar signs or anything like that. So let's see if that works. And we go to the fill handle at the bottom right until your mouse changes into a thin cross, and we double click, drop down, and there we go. And now you can format this properly, which we'll look at a bit later, but the calculation has been properly done. The first cell is B6 times rate, the second cell is B7 times rate, and then we've got B8 times rate, and then we've got B9 times rate. So now you can see how useful it is to actually use a named range or a named cell to perform calculations. That being said, please remember that you have basically three things that you need to keep in mind. Whenever you're working with formulas or wherever you're working with a calculation, the three things you need to keep in mind is that Excel works with relative references, which is the default, and if you had to copy and paste, it would do a relative calculation. Excel can work with absolute calculations as well, and you saw how to do that when we manually inserted the dollar signs. And maybe you'd like to do that, whatever the situation is. But then, and as you progress with learning Excel and you start working with ranges and ranges of information and data blocks, and you work with VLOOKUPs and HLOOKUPs, instead of having to type in that range every time, if you could give either a block of data or a piece of data a name, you can always just go and utilize the name as a reference. And Excel will always then refer back to whatever that name is. The name would stay constant, and it would be the same kind of exercise as doing an absolute reference. I hope that taught you something. In fact, can I ask you there in the chat box, if you found that a wow, would you please type in yes, that we can see? Is that a wow? Type in yes. And I see we're getting a couple of yes, 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 yeses. So I'm glad, because that's really going to make your life a lot easier. So if we look at what our exercise or our notes say, Excel formulas allow you to perform calculations on number data entered into a worksheet. And Excel can be used for number crunching and blah, blah, blah. It always begins with the equal sign, and then we talk about using cell references in formulas. And we've moved on already as to how to use the named ranges in the formula. And we've actually done this calculation already is the first formula created in cell 6 will multiply the gross salary of employee B. And not employee B, B Smith, by the reduction rate in cell 3. And the finished formula in cell C6 will be B6 times rate. Is that what we've got? Absolutely yes. We've got B6 times rate. Then also, although it is possible to just type the formula into cell C and have the correct answer appear, it's better to use pointing. I spoke about pointing just now, and we're doing a bit of a recap, but I really need this to all make sense to you and to so that you can embrace it and use it in this week lying ahead. So it's better to use pointing to add references to formulas. What does pointing mean? It means that you don't have to go and type in the reference, you just click on the data block that you're wanting to use. And we did this whole exercise already, and we've now are going to move on to entering the net salary formula, which is column D. Now, I'm just a little bit concerned that I might have given too much information over this last while and that you might need a break before we get there. I know it's not quite 11 o'clock yet, but we have a poll that we can quickly run that will give me an idea. Am I moving too slow, too fast, or is the porridge just right? Shane, do you have that one ready for us so that we can just ask the pace of today's lesson? Is it too slow, too fast, or just right? And after the poll, we will then take a 10-minute break.
Okay, thanks, Connie. I must say I've just been battling with one of our attendees, Nazira. If you're able to hear right now, won't you please just respond to me via the messaging system? I actually tried to phone your office, but they didn't want to put me through because they said you told them not to disturb you. So I'm a bit snookered, but I've got a couple of ideas that I'd like to try with you, please, if you are open to that. Otherwise, the recording is coming through steadily, and all the other attendees have confirmed that their experience has been good. So I think it's just an isolated incident, I'm afraid. Okay, guys, there's the poll. Quick one: is the pace of this learning too slow or too fast, or as Baby Bear said, is it just right? And I'll give you a few seconds to score. Connie, we're getting the votes coming in, and so far you've hit it on the head again. It looks like it's going to be 100%. 100%. Any last takers? Going. Oh, there we go. Looks like everybody's voted, and I'll share the results with you guys. There we go. 100%. We didn't have any too slows or too fast. Connie, you're doing it just right. So keep going. Well done.
Great stuff. Well, I think if it might be then a good time to take a break and see if we can get the attendee that's having a problem online. That's maybe an ideal opportunity. So if we can do that, then is everybody happy?